Okay, well, I'm not looking forward to this. This is going to literally be the hardest video I have ever had to make. If you follow me on the internet for any time now, you'll know that I've always tried to debunk scientific misinformation. I never thought that I would be responsible for promoting it. Now, I am aware that after this video, I will probably lose the vast amount of my subscribers. Anybody who's followed me some time will think that I'm doing a 180 turn. It will come as a massive shock to you, I'm sure. But after a lot of contemplation, I do need to just say things as I see them and let you know what I've come to believe. I really think I owe you that. All I can ask is that you'll just hear me out, so at least you know the reasons for what I'm about to say. Oh, and also, things are going to get pretty messy after this, so if you're not subscribed, please do so you can see the fallout. Okay, let's begin. So it all started here just last week when I made a video about a Dr John Campbell video, and it's ironic now, but at the time I called it I Can Help John Campbell. Little did I know at the time that it would be that video that would actually be altering my entire worldview. You see, as always, I play the smug character, yeah, the sarcastic lad from Lancashire, and I even signed off ironically with this smug little speech, thinking that I'd helped and actually accomplished something. Okay, John, I hope I've been of some help today. I do appreciate that you have read Dr. Spiker's non-peer-reviewed preprint paper from over 12 months ago. I appreciate that you've read that. But also, there's a lot of other papers out there and a lot of other science as well that you can also read that might help ease your concerns. So, good luck with that. Yes, it was quite the smug sign-off, wasn't it? And I will be apologising in this video for my behaviour, really, in the past and the criticisms I've had against John's content. I do want to say, though, that not all my criticisms have been unfair. So maybe just in the sense of balance or to make myself feel better, I do want to just revisit a couple of the times I've criticised him for things that I still genuinely believe he could have done better. For example, and I've mentioned this many times, he interviewed John O'Looney, somebody who at the start of the pandemic didn't even think that COVID was real until he caught it and ended up in ICU. And then he posts ridiculous things on Twitter, such as he's going to buy a UV torch to see whether vaccinated people illuminate. So I do stand by my criticism of that. I think people like John O'Looney, who initially denied COVID existed until he caught it and ended up in ICU, the man who posts endless streams of shite on Twitter day after day after day, they shouldn't be given platforms to be listened to by millions of people and treated as if they were some kind of expert. I do feel that my criticism of that was valid. I also criticised John when he released his hilarious nanobots video where he essentially looked at a paper that claimed that there was self-assembling nanotechnology inside the COVID injectables. I laughed at that, mainly because it was really funny, especially this bit.
Now, these are from the publication. These are some of the nanostructures that were observed in, as I've said before, conditions that were designed to duplicate human cells in the human body. So these are the sort of structures that they were finding. I mean, what the heck is that? You know, that is a structure that spontaneously sort of put itself together, a spontaneous assembly. So these spiral ones seem to come up, again, spontaneously, just put themselves together, spontaneous sort of, another spiral there, another one there. I mean, look at it. I mean, what is that? What are these things? I mean, it's just, yeah, an explanation is clearly required here. I would have thought. Let me know what you think.
But again, that's just one standalone video and anybody can make mistakes. I mean, look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, have you ever made a similar mistake? How many of us haven't, for example, once believed that Transformers were real and lived inside tomato soup? You know, I'm sure many of us are guilty of that kind of thing. And the last thing I've criticised John Campbell for was for interviewing this man here, Andrew Bridgham. Mainly because Andrew also does and says some pretty outlandish things. My favourite example is when he created a team of 15 world experts to place in front of the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Only it turned out that there weren't many experts among them. They consisted of an ex-professional football player, Mr. UV Torch himself, John O'Looney, and a woman that believed the ISS wasn't real because she had no idea how, I think, UPS could deliver gorilla suits to them.
Also, then you see them like playing the guitar or wearing a gorilla suit, and it's like, well, how did that get there? Who posted that? What kind of
Yeah.
delivery service delivers to some machine that's going at 17,000 miles an hour?
But having said all of that, science is science, and when good, solid science is presented, we all need the intellectual honesty to look at it, to study it, and if it's correct, to accept it and to acknowledge where we are wrong, or in this case, where I have been incredibly wrong. Last week, I jumped in without thinking. John presented a paper by this man here, a certain Dr. David Speaker. Speaker attempted to measure the amount of DNA contamination in the injectables, and he concluded that the results were pretty much off the scale bad. He was also worried about something called an SV40 sequence being found in there too, and more on that later on. Now, I reacted to that video by Dr. John Campbell, and in good faith, I presented arguments that I thought would alleviate John's worries about the findings that Dr. Speaker was presenting, and that we could all perhaps just move on. Little did I know that it was the beginning of a journey for me to transform my entire worldview, and little did I know how wrong I was at the time. For example, I called into question the technique that Dr. Speaker used to measure the amount of DNA contamination, a technique called qubit fluorometry, and here's what I had to say about it at the time. Speaker and McKernan used a technique called qubit fluorometry to measure the amount of DNA present. Now, with qubit fluorometry, essentially you can measure the amount of DNA present because it fluoresces, and you could even see it fluoresce with a microscope. Now, first of all, that's one of the dumbest things I have ever said. So dumb that an actual retired academic, a professional in the field, an expert in qubit fluorometry, reached out to me to let me know how wrong I was. And they spent an hour with me on a video call just a couple of days ago to go through the process with me. And I really do want to thank that individual for the vast amount of time they spent with me. They actually recorded this video here of them performing qubit fluorometry, and we can see there's no microscope involved, there's no viewing of fluorescence. There was no reason for me whatsoever to bring in microscopes and actually viewing the DNA glowing. It was pretty dumb on my part. Now, I want to apologise, first of all, to Dr. Speaker and Dr. John Campbell for making that mistake. If I'm going to try and challenge what you are saying, I really should, be getting stuff right, shouldn't I? All I can say at this point is I simply listened to the first person I heard about this technique, and I didn't research it, and I just copied what they said. In fact, I heard it from this guy.
Now, Dr. Speaker uses a technique called fluorometry. Now, this basically attaches a fluorescent molecule to the DNA. And then that means when the DNA is present, you can see it with your microscope. It fluoresces, and you can actually see it.
So, John, I'd like to apologise for repeating the incorrect information I heard about qubit fluorometry, which is the technique that David used to measure the amount of DNA. That's my bad. But still, that's by the by. Let's move on to the next point, which is the presence of SV40 or simian virus 40 in the DNA contamination. Now, simian virus is a virus which has the potential in some species to cause malignant change, as John puts it, and that sounds very serious. We're not entirely sure that it will do that in humans. I think there's an argument that it probably doesn't, but still, we obviously want to know, and we obviously want to get to the bottom of it. And John here is a little bit concerned about the presence in this DNA contamination.
So Health Canada know that this contaminating SV40 potential cancer-causing sequence is there.
Now again, I completely fluffed up and dropped the ball on this. I spent time faffing about on PowerPoint talking about promoters and enhancers and what their role were, rather than looking at the bigger picture. But my academic source put me right. So Dr. Speaker's method section in his paper clearly says that they used previously published primer and probe sequences to track down these target sequences of DNA. And he goes on to show them here. And these are 100% legit. They've done a really, really good job at producing the right primers to go and hunt down the SV40 promoter sequence that is found in the plasmids that are used to produce the mRNA. But what I didn't know at the time is that these primers simply will not bind to the genome of the virus itself, which we can see on screen now. So it turns out that the primers used here are just simply the wrong tool if you are looking for the viral DNA itself. These primers are designed to search for the highly modified SV40 base sequence, which is used in plasmids in a wide range of genetic techniques. These primers simply will not bind to that viral genome whatsoever. So if there is anybody out there who is worried that finding these fragments of SV40 is somehow going to be linked to the presence of a virus capable of malignant change, then you literally have nothing to worry about. Anyway, let's address the biggest elephant in the room.
There is 10 trillion copies of this DNA sequence per dose. Now, I was taken aback by this. Dr. Speaker has found that the Moderna one particularly, can contain up to 10 million copies of DNA fragment per dose.
And that is a really, really big number. For any flat earthers out there, you simply don't have enough fingers and toes to count up to that. It does sound very, very worrying. Now, how I approached this in my video last week is I referred to a video by the brilliant Dr. Susan Oliver at the Back to the Science channel. Now, when I mentioned Dr. Susan Oliver's video, I said that she correctly said that when there is a large amount of mRNA mixed in with DNA and you are using qubit fluorometry, the result that you will get back will be wildly inaccurate. Now, Dr. Susan Oliver is brilliant, but I didn't do her argument justice. So, Dr. Susan Oliver, I'd also like to apologise to you. Here is my academic source calibrating the qubit fluorometry machine. He's placing into the machine here something called standard 1. This is a dye, the dye that is going to fluoresce when it binds to DNA. He then adds standard 2, which is a solution that contains a known amount of DNA. Now, it's important to remember in qubit fluorometry that we're not directly measuring the amount of DNA that's in the sample. What we are measuring is the amount of dye that binds to that DNA and starts to fluoresce. And that is going to be dependent upon the conditions of the test. And this is why calibration is important. The first tube basically contains only dye, and it kind of gives a measure of background noise which can be eliminated. The second tube contains a known amount of DNA, and we are telling the machine exactly how much DNA is in that vial. The machine then determines, under those conditions, how much fluorescence that known amount of DNA is able to produce. And therefore, it can predict, based on the amount of fluorescence produced by another sample under the same conditions, how much DNA is in a sample. But without that initial calibration, the whole process is pretty much worthless, and here is the problem. In Dr. Speaker's paper, they used the normal standards to calibrate the machine. And the standards, remember, is just the name for those little vials that they're putting in the machine. But the problem is you can't calibrate the machine against the standards and then assume that you're going to get accurate results when you are actually testing DNA in a solution which is nothing like the standards, a solution which contains vast amounts of mRNA plus a whole other load of things. Remember, in different solutions, the affinity of the dye to bind with DNA is going to change. And my source even did a little experiment for me to show where he's taken vials with the same amount of DNA, but effectively different conditions inside the vial. And we can see on screen now, as the conditions start to become more and more different, how that is affecting the reading of the result on the screen. So Dr. Speaker and or his team have made a very honest attempt at trying to calibrate the machine. But however honest it was also incorrect, rendering any result they get from the machine thereafter to be completely and utterly meaningless. So I do hope that I've done a better job this time around, and I do want to apologise to John Campbell. I said I would. I was smug, I was sarcastic, I was not entirely correct. And what I've done is I've come back and I have corrected myself in a video for everybody else to see. And I know after seeing this example, I know that you will also go back and you will also correct some of your past videos. For example, this one.
Now, these are from the publication. These are some of the nanostructures that were observed in, as I've said before, conditions that were designed to duplicate human cells in the human body. So these are the sort of structures that they were finding. I mean, what the heck is that? You know, that is a structure that spontaneously sort of put itself together, a spontaneous assembly. So these spiral ones seem to come up, again, spontaneously, just put themselves together, spontaneous sort of, another spiral there, another one there. I mean, look at it. I mean, what is that? What are these things? I mean, it's just, yeah, an explanation is clearly required here. I would have thought. Let me know what you think.